and welcome to Dialogue. Around 1,500 public figures, including dozens of leading economists and 2 Nobel laureates, have signed an open letter condemning U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff policy. They describe it as misguided and warn that it could trigger a self-inflicted recession. At the same time, the UN Conference on Trade and Development has warned that the global economy is entering a recessionary phase, with growth expected to slow to just 2.3% this year, amid rising trade tensions and widespread uncertainty. What does this anti-tariff petition reveal about the direction of President Trump's trade strategy and the level of domestic support it actually commands? The tariff stalemate drags on with no sign of resolution. What lies ahead for global trade? Join us for this important discussion from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining us for today's show are Brad DeLong, Professor of Economics at UC Berkeley, Liang, Kremer Chair, Professor of Economics at Willamette University, and Radhika Desai, Director of the Geopolitical Economy Research Group. Welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you very much for having us.
Well, thank you. Bradford, I will start with you. So we have this petition letter titled Trade and Tariffs Declaration, a statement on the principles of American prosperity. The authors, they are especially critical of Trump's recent so-called reciprocal tariffs, saying that the tariff rates are, as we know, calculated using this erroneous and improvised formula with no basis in economic reality. But interestingly, of course, the authors warn the window to reverse these incoherent and damaging policies is closing. So, time is running out?
I would say there are two aspects, and in one aspect, time has run out, and in the other, time is running out. The time that is running out is the time to avoid the actual imposition of high tariffs that will do severe damage to the highly productive globalized division of labor and make all countries poorer by breaking substantially their trade links. We have all benefited enormously from globalization and will continue to benefit, provided it is not disastrously managed. Countries that have tried to move away from that, of which the most prominent was Great Britain with its Brexit in 2016, have suffered substantially. The current estimates are that Britain is now 10% poorer than it would have been had it not broken its trade links with the European Union back in 2016. While the European Union is little poorer. That is, the European Union did a lot of things for Britain that Britain could not do for itself, but what Britain did for the European Union can be done in other parts of the European Union as well. So figure that the United States in a decade is likely to be 10% poorer than it would have been otherwise, like Britain is, simply because we have created huge amounts of uncertainty about the extent to which we are committed to the international economy. And so as a result, every single one of our counterparties is now looking for other potential suppliers and customers to replace the United States because the United States has become an unreliable partner in globalization. And that's if the tariffs are never actually imposed. If Trump continues to threaten them one day and reverse them the next, and impose some tariffs on limited sectors now, and take those tariffs off later when, say, Tim Cook brings to him the case that these will be substantially disastrous for American consumers, but then 3 days later says, no, they will come back on because there will be another round of semiconductor tariffs coming in. So, the window that is closed has been the window to avoid a United States equivalent of Brexit, which has been a disaster for Britain. The window that is closing is the window to actually back off and not impose any of these tariffs, but instead to simply say, let's pretend this did not happen.
Right. Liang, what about in terms of time is running out? What about the deal making? Are we seeing any deal to be reached during the period of 90 days?
Yeah, good to be with you, Xingduo, and also distinguished panelists. Well, I think, yes, Trump has been talking about, he's playing this 4D chess and he's having this art of deal. But first of all, I agree with Professor DeLong that the way not only the tariff is being very damaging to the US economy, the counterparties, but also global economy, but also just the way the tariff is rolled out, this on and off, very erratic kind of implementation of tariff is also making things very difficult. Not to mention, I think right now, for all the countries that are interested in negotiating, the parameters of negotiations are very uncertain. In other words, countries don't really know what exactly Donald Trump wants, right? Trump talked about reciprocal tariff, but essentially what he wants is to impose a tariff to eliminate the trade deficits that the United States has with all these other countries. But we do know tariff is not the reason for the United States to have the tariff, to have the deficits with all these other countries. So, for example, Japan has offered they already have effective tariff rate on their the U.S. auto imports into the Japanese market to essentially zero. But it's not enough for Japan to import enough, U.S. autos to satisfy the United States. So now they have to revise their safety standards, inspections, to hopefully allow more, U.S. exports of automobiles to Japan. So I think it's very difficult for countries to really understand what Donald Trump wants. Japan has just sort of finished their first round of negotiation, and again, the report says that basically they don't know what the United States wants, and the United States doesn't know what they want. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is very ironic because Donald Trump keeps saying that tariff can do all these wonderful things, raise revenues for the U.S., reduce the U.S. trade deficit, bring manufacturing back to the United States, and also get some non-economic objectives achieved by countries making concessions to the U.S. But again, none of this is clear what exactly Donald Trump wants, because none of these objectives can be achieved all at once, right? If you wanted to have more tariff revenues, then the tariff needs to stay in place. And yet you wanted to use it as a leverage so you can put it on or off, depending on if you achieve other goals. So I think this is very difficult for countries, to say the least. And I think the other problem also with Donald Trump's all these sort of on and off tariffs is that it loses its credibility, just like Professor DeLong just talked about, that even if the deal can be made today, right, who knows what tomorrow Donald Trump may impose tariff for other reasons. Mm-hmm. And so I think, this makes it very difficult for not knowing exactly what the deal looks like, and also not have the credibility to carry through the deal. I think that just, made the whole sort of deal making a pretty much a stalemate.
Yeah, well, it seems that there's tons of challenges right now. Yeah, Professor DeLong, go ahead.
I would like to reinforce that last point. Mm-hmm. In his first term, Donald Trump demanded that Mexico and Canada renegotiate the North American Free Trade Agreement, which he said was the worst trade agreement it ever had. And Canada and Mexico agreed. And so there were negotiations led by Robert Lighthizer. The end result was the United States-Canada-Mexico agreement, which Trump said was the greatest trade agreement the United States had ever made and promised to honor. Lo and behold, January 21st, 2025 comes along. Donald Trump is back in the presidency. Does he honor the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement?
No.
No. What does having made an agreement with Trump in the past have gained Mexico and Canada in terms of their relationships with Donald Trump? Nothing. If you make an agreement, if you make a concession with Donald Trump, he doesn't even say thank you. He then forgets that he has made the agreement and he makes new demands. So I do not see how Trump can negotiate. In order to negotiate, people have to believe that your word is good and that what concessions they make will be matched by concessions you make, and that those concessions will then be honored, that the agreement is in fact an agreement, rather than something that he will break tomorrow when he wakes up having not slept very well the previous night. Yeah. And, Trump simply cannot do that.
Mm-hmm. What about this point? Interestingly, as Liang mentioned, the Japanese side, after the first round of talks, basically complained, U.S. does not know what they want. So it seems the Trump government is not ready for talks, for negotiation, or even demands concessions. What kind of concession from Japan?
As you say, Peter Navarro wants one set of things. Scott Bessent wants a second. Kevin Hassett wants yet a third. Stephen Mirren had an interesting, but I thought unsound working paper last year, which has a fourth set of things. And Donald Trump wants either none of those or all of these, or whatever the last person he talked to said.
Yeah.
And so with 5 factions within the U.S. government, none of which can commit to the agreement of any others, there is no one to negotiate with.
Yes.
Henry Kissinger used to have a line that you could not negotiate with Europe because there was nobody to talk to when you tried to pick up the phone.
Right.
And that applies much more to the Trump administration than it ever did to the European Union.
Interesting point there. Liang, of course, goes back a little bit to the origin of the tariffs there. The letter argues, quote, the current administration's tariffs are motivated by a mistaken understanding of the economic conditions faced by ordinary Americans. It's like, they talked about the purpose of tariffs, of course. They talked about bringing manufacturing jobs to the U.S. But the people would wonder, the unemployment rate is not that high. There's no problem with jobs, or lack of jobs. But anyway, so economic conditions, what's the mistaken understanding here?
Right. Well, so first of all, I think Trump has this very peculiar, very zero-sum thinking that somehow if the U.S. is running a trade deficit, that means other countries are ripping the United States off. Right. So as if you go to a store and buy stuff and you have a deficit with your store, then the store is ripping you off. And so he somehow believes that's the case. And so therefore, he thinks the U.S. is suffering from the kind of trade deficit. But the matter of fact is, the United States has been able to net import these goods by hundreds of billions of dollars and, trillions of dollars in the past 50 years. Since 1975, the U.S. basically consistently running trade deficit, meaning that they're just basically paying, the dollars that they have the monopoly, issuance over with in exchange for these real goods and services that people can enjoy. So in the past, decades, the U.S. Consumers are able to enjoy great varieties and low price, good quality of products that they're able to import from other countries. But somehow, Trump believed this is a suffering for the ordinary Americans. Now, second point that you made is that, yes, he thinks that these tariffs somehow can bring the manufacturing jobs back home. But let's see the evidence. When Trump was in the first administration, he also imposed tariffs. But by the end of his 4-year term, the manufacturing job actually had a net loss of 2.7%. And this is according to a Federal Reserve Board study, that in fact, there's no manufacturing job increase during the 4-year term of Trump. But of course, there was the pandemic and everything that was in between. But still, even netting out those effects, the Trump tariff 1.0 pretty much didn't create any sort of net jobs in the manufacturing sector. And you're also right. It's not necessary that Americans want those manufacturing jobs, right? There are actually a survey that shows the majority of Americans believe that U.S. needs to revitalize its critical, strategic manufacturing sector. And yet, when it's asked, whether or not these American workers are willing to work in the factories, the great majority say no. And so I think that is very interesting. Not to mention, I think, many of the company surveys and show that if companies do kind of bring their manufacturing jobs back home, they are going to automate those jobs because labor cost is simply too high. Skilled workers are simply too far in between. So they would have to rely on automation for manufacturing. So just put all of this in short, I don't think the American households really wanted to see price increases for the essential, daily needs, especially low-income families. They don't want to suffer from the consumption side, nor are they going to get any job effects when it comes to, of sort of manufacturing jobs that are going to, offer more job opportunities for average Americans.
Professor DeLong, you earlier mentioned about the changing, the capricious nature, of course, of Trump himself, let's say. I mean, he's the president. I mean, if it ever changes, so it's very difficult to talk to him. And I think, recently he tweeted a so-called non-tariff cheating list I see it as, again, some new changes in terms of negotiation with U.S. trading partners. For example, along the list, he listed the currency manipulation, VATs, which act as tariffs in his eyes, and export subsidies. And he also talked about protective agriculture standards. He gave an example, like no genetically engineered corn in the EU from the US. And of course, protective technical standards like Japan's bowling ball test. So if you follow this test closely, I mean, he is making any possible negotiation more complicated. Is that the case?
It certainly is. But it's not coherent, right? It's not as if there is a consistent and coherent theory of the economy behind, the proposals that Trump has made. That say, suppose one seriously believed that there were important economic and political and social externalities from having manufacturing jobs, because manufacturing jobs are good ways to redistribute economic increasing returns to scale rents to a broader proportion of the population, and were also a source of social cohesion. The manufacturing working class being a principal agent in world history for more equalization of income and for more opportunity. The kinds of things that Marx and Engels thought was the importance of getting manufacturing jobs in order to make a country move properly ahead, out of the commercial age into the steam power modern age. And if you believed, as I do, that having manufacturing plants and jobs in your country is a very good spur to the development of communities of engineering practice that then enable widely based technological progress. If you really believe that, you would provide for various subsidies for those activities likely to bring the communities of engineering practice and the large base of manufacturing jobs to your country that you thought were more advantageous than simply market prices allowed. But such calculations are complicated. Such calculations would involve an awful lot of staff work. Such calculations would not involve putting enormous tariffs on coffee producers, because there is no way that America is ever going to get the climate to grow significant amounts of coffee. Now, Scott Bessent, Treasury Secretary, says it was never intended seriously. That is, that the reciprocal tariffs are not supposed to be put into effect ever. They are just a way of getting other countries' attention so that they come to the negotiating table and negotiate. To which my friend and patron, former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers, responded, well, yes, if you want to get someone's attention, to run up to them and hit them in the nose with your fist. That will certainly get their attention. But that's not the type of thing you want to do if then you want to have a friendly and productive negotiation afterwards. And yet that's what the Trump administration did.
Well, yes. Now we have Radhika with us. Radhika, overall, we are talking about this petition letter, critical of Trump's tariffs, basically saying that, everything is wrong with the tariffs or whatever. And now they say time is running out in negotiation with trading partners. So how do you see, the progress so far since the Liberation Day? Do you think there's a great prospect for reaching deals with other trading nations here?
Not at all. I think that if the purpose was to essentially reach agreements with other countries, it would have had to be a situation, as I say, a much more conducive situation in which hitting people on the head with these tariffs and then negotiating would not have been a good idea. So as we see, the negotiations with Japan have not resulted in anything very big. Japan was in the front of the line. The Trump administration continues to antagonize other people across a whole slew of things, whether it is on defense issues, other economic issues. The IMF meetings are going on, and there is speculation as to whether the United States will remain a member of the IMF. So in every front, the US is alienating its former economic and political partners. Meanwhile, the United States is doing this at a time when the attraction of China, the ability of China to attract other people to itself, other countries to itself, more trading partners to itself, um, uh, 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 to enable existing trading partners to deepen their economic relationships is so much greater than ever before in its history.
Radhika, of course, there's a report that Washington has a plan to basically pressure its trading partners to distance themselves from Beijing in exchange for a deal with the U.S. over the tariffs. And then there's a response from UK Chancellor Rachel Reeves saying that China is the second largest economy in the world, and it would be, I think, very foolish not to engage. So do you think Trump will be successful in pressuring other countries to stay away from China?
Absolutely not. I mean, the very fact that Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the country in the world that regards itself as the closest ally of the United States, is saying this should tell you something. As I said in my previous answer, today the attractiveness of the United States is at a low ebb. The attractiveness of China is at a peak, and it may continue to rise. So we shouldn't call it a peak, but it's at a high point never before seen. So in the circumstances, people are being asked to choose between, something that's very attractive, a big, beautiful mansion versus a dilapidated little house. And shrinking house.
Well, Liang, again, of course, from the Chinese side, there's a response recently. A spokesperson from the Commerce Ministry saying that China will take measures to protect its interests if any nation basically reach a deal with the U.S. at the expense of the Chinese interests. How do you make of that?
Right. Well, so first of all, I agree with Professor Desai. I think, the U.S. has proven itself as an unreliable partner. And not to mention, China has been much more integrated in the global economy when it comes to trade. African countries have China as the largest trading partners, and the ASEAN countries also have China as the largest trading partners. China has become the largest trading partners with over 100 countries in the world. So I think it's incredibly difficult for these countries to kind of disengage with China. Not to mention, this is not really in their interest to do so, as the U.S. has proven as unreliable. Now, that said, I do believe that there are smaller countries like Panama, for example, was really under this tremendous pressure, and they agreed to exit from the BRI. So I do believe that it's important for countries to collectively, get together, right? This is, I think, also a very clear message from President Xi when he toured the 3 Southeastern Asian countries, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia, to say that we need to work together, right? We need to build this regional integration. We need to have a trading system so that we'll be able to collectively bargain, so to speak, right? Or stand up to this kind of bully and unilateralism. Now, second, as to the Chinese response, I think, we should not see this as a way that China joined the United States to pressure, these other countries. But the way I see it is that the Chinese, government is actually saying, when you negotiate with the United States, be sure that you remind them that China is going to take countermeasure if I do agree to disengage, right? That if I do side with the United States at the expense of China. So this is not the luxury of choice that I can make because after all, China is a big player here. China is the major trade partner, is the major investor, is the major financier for my country. So I think Beijing is trying to use this to actually beef up the leveraging power of these counterparties of these third countries when it comes to the negotiation with the United States.
Well, let's take this global outlook. Of course, there's a warning from the UN agency, Industrial Development Organization. Radhika, the article basically criticizing the policy, of course, saying that by driving up the cost of industrial production, these tariffs undermine economic efficiency, diminish the benefits of trade, weaken competitiveness, etc. So what about this global trade landscape long term? I mean, near term, basically every country is already suffering from these tariffs now.
Sure. So clearly, tariffs, tariffs have historically played a role in helping to industrialize countries in the United States itself, but also in other major industrializers, whether it is Germany or Japan or where have you. So tariffs are not unimportant, but they do not work on their own. They can only work when they are paired with a sensible industrial strategy. In the case of the United States, there's absolutely no such plan.
U.S. economy, of course, now there's a kind of a stalemate. Basically, countries. Majority of countries they don't really know how to figure out this trap. Like some say, U.S. allies in the EU and Asia are now considering a de-risking from Trump, and some argue that only a global de-risking from the U.S. can stop Trump's trade war. Liang, anything we can do probably to put all the stuff aside and focus on serious economic relationship?
Well, I don't think so. I think going back to earlier what Professor DeLong talked about is that the time is running out to reverse course. And it doesn't look like the Donald Trump's administration is going to reverse the course, right, to have the course correction. I think Donald Trump's MO has been, if it doesn't work, let's double it down. So I think that is going down that rabbit hole. If the tariff doesn't work, then let's continue to add. So I think countries will de-risk, as we just mentioned, that they are not going to disengage with China. If anything, they're going to look for more regional partners, international partners, multilateral partners. And China is definitely going to play a very important role here, a vital role, either in the RCEP agreements with Southeast Asian economies or BRICS or other platforms. I think, countries will try to de-risk and form an alternative trading systems and, even maybe step forward and form other kinds of systems when it comes to clearing payments and so on and so forth. So I think this is going to be a, very interesting, epic-making, I would say, event. And again, not to the advantage to the United States.
On that note, we are coming to the end of today's discussion. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Xu Jinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.